Back in 2015, when I was a student, I was living in a shared apartment with another student and the landlord with his wife. The landlady couldn't speak a word of English and had so many different rules, some necessary and some outright illegal. One such ridiculous rule was that I wasn't allowed to eat in my room. One day I was on the phone talking to my mother and the landlady barged into my room and caught me eating chips while I was talking on the phone. She started shouting and I had to apologize for not following the rules. It was much later that I found out not only are such inspections not allowed, it's actually illegal for the landlord to barge into the apartment without prior notice and permission. This information could have saved me so much headache. That is why in this video, I want to share 9 things you must know while renting in Germany. By the way, if you're new to the channel, my name is Essen and on this channel, we discuss how to live a dignified life in Germany, starting with inspection by the landlord. As I just mentioned, what my landlady did was totally incorrect, but landlords do have the right to inspect the property if they have a specific reason. Now, an acceptable reason could be looking for defects or damages when repairs are necessary. Back in 2016, a student friend of mine told me that his landlord also barged into his apartment, saying that the apartment was damaged and he had to do an inspection. Now, obviously, the whole apartment was messy, including the kitchen and the toilet. Besides being embarrassed, the students were also given a warning. Back then, I too got scared of such unannounced inspections with my recent experiences. But even though the landlord had a right to inspection, they simply cannot come in without permission. They need to give notice ahead of time, usually a few days. If they need to read the heater meter, they need to give 10 to 14 days notice. If there's urgent work that needs to be done, like repairs, they only need to give 24 hours notice. But even then, they have to give prior notice. Thankfully, there's no general inspection right for the landlords. If your landlord doesn't follow this, simply say that he cannot come in according to Artikel 13 Absatz 1 des Grundgesetzes. Contract termination. Now, it's not very common that your landlord asks you to leave your apartment. However, if certain conditions are met, your landlord can end your contract, and in some conditions, without giving notice as part of a special termination. Thankfully, they cannot do this via email or SMS. They have to do this in writing. The letter also needs to be signed by the landlord and must clearly state the reason for ending the contract and how much time you have to move out. The amount of notice required depends on how long you have been living there. If it's less than 5 years, the notice period is 3 months. If it's between 5 and 8 years, the notice period can be up to 6 months. And if it has been more than 8 years, the notice period can be 9 months. Reasons for ending the contract can include you breaking the rental agreement or the landlord needing the property for personal use. Termination without notice can happen if you sublet the apartment without permission, intentionally damage or neglect the property, or repeatedly do not pay rent. This is quite common with students. They go on holidays and sublet their room or just keep other students in their apartment without informing the landlord. In this case, your landlord can kick you out of the apartment within a month. So please be careful. The next thing you must know about renting in Germany is the deposit payment. Your landlord has a legal right to ask for a deposit payment when you are renting in Germany. This rental deposit can be up to 3 times the monthly rent, but not more than that. You should get this money back when you leave the room or apartment. But this money must not be refunded to you as soon as you leave. Now let me explain. This can be very stressful if you are a student or have a high cold rent. As the Nebenkosten or the additional costs are billed annually, your landlord can withhold a reasonable part or even the whole deposit amount for up to 12 months. This gives the landlord time to find out any damage when the apartment is handed over and to determine whether they have received the last rent and operating cost payments on time. If the landlord does not refund your deposit after 12 months, you as someone renting in Germany can file a legal case against your landlord. In the end, you will not get your rental deposit until you have moved out, finished any needed repairs, and paid any remaining costs. Please hit the like button if you're getting value from this video and consider subscribing. Apartment keys. When you are renting in Germany and have been handed over the apartment or a room, your landlord must give you all of the keys to the apartment. This includes not only the house and apartment keys, but also the keys to the basement, for the underground car park or the garage, and the mailbox keys. Here is one thing most people do not know. your landlord is not allowed to have spare keys when you are renting in Germany. If the landlord insists that they must have a spare key, you can categorically deny this demand from your landlord. Your landlord also cannot ask you to return the keys before your contract ends. And in general, nothing can be agreed in the rental agreement that violates this applicable law. In the case of an emergency, for example, if you are on a holiday, you can give the key to someone you trust and give that person's details to your landlord. Or if you trust your landlord, you can even give the keys to them. But if you feel that your landlord has an extra key and they are not telling you the truth, you are even allowed to change the lock on the apartment for the duration of your rental agreement. Now, if you lose the keys or are locked out of the apartment without a spare key, you must notify the landlord immediately and you have to pay the cost for the key replacement. This can be very expensive, but here liability insurance can save you a lot of money. I'll put my favorite liability insurance that includes key replacement in the description below. Let's talk about rent increase. Now, honestly speaking, rent is probably the single biggest expense most of us renting in Germany have. But unfortunately, rent can increase. Your landlord can even increase the rent in your existing contract. However, they can only do this if there hasn't been another rent increase in the past 15 months after moving in or 12 months after the last rental increase. When increasing rent, the landlord must also follow the legal limit, which means rent cannot go up more than 20% in the last 3 years or 15% in the areas with tight housing markets. And the landlord simply cannot say that your rent will increase from the next month. They must notify you of the rent increase at least 2 months before the new rent starts. This notice should be in writing, either by email or letter. The notice must also explain the reason for the rent increase, comparing it to local rents. The landlord can use different sources to justify this, like a local rent list, rental database, expert opinion, or by comparing 3 similar apartments. My landlady increased my rent by 9% after about 3 years. This wasn't ideal, but way under compared to other apartments in my area. Now, for your rent increase to take effect, you must agree to it within a given time. You have until the end of the second full month after receiving the notice to decide whether you agree totally, partially, or reject the rent increase. If you don't respond, the landlord has 3 months to file legal action to enforce the rent increase or force you to move out. Now, landlords often make mistakes when increasing rent, so do not sign anything right away. Take your time to check if the rent increase is based on the correct information, like the apartment's year of construction, and ensure the rent isn't increasing more than 20% over the last 3 years or 15% with areas with tight housing markets. The next thing you must know about renting in Germany is the operating expenses. If you are renting in Germany, your landlord can charge you for operating costs. These extra costs might include things like property tax, elevator maintenance, street cleaning, building cleaning, lighting, and insurance, among many others. The landlord must explain these costs clearly in the utility bill. But your landlord can only charge you these extra costs if they are listed in your contract. If you pay for utilities in advance each month, like with Nebenkosten, your landlord must give you a utility bill each year. This bill must be sent within 1 year. So the bill for 2023 should be given by December 31st, 2024. If the landlord misses this deadline, they cannot charge you extra. But you can still ask for the Nebenkostenabrechnung to get a refund if you have overpaid your additional costs. There are also some landlords who have a flat rate for Nebenkosten. With this flat rate, you always pay a fixed rent which includes all of the additional utilities. Students would be most familiar with this kind of agreement. I too had such a kind of rental agreement. For 3 years or so, my landlady was okay with this, probably because I was paying more than I was using. But in 2023, my landlady asked me to pay around €300 extra even though I had a flat rate. I reminded her about the flat rate, but she was insisting. I said that I will pay for the additional costs this year only if she shared the bills for the previous years and I could look into those bills as well. At that point, she knew I realized my rights. Then she had to change my contract to include a non-flat rate from 2 months in the future, as I just explained. One more important thing to know is that your landlord must make sure that your apartment can be heated at least 20 degrees Celsius during the heating periods. These heating periods are from October 1st to April 30th. If the apartment cannot be heated properly, you can even reduce the rent that you pay. I also have a written article on everything that I have explained in this video on snfinance.com. Maintenance and repairs. Landlords are responsible for taking care of and fixing the property. This includes paying for repairs to things like water, electricity, and gas pipes. You as a renter in Germany only have to pay for small repairs inside the apartment. For example, you might need to pay for a replacement of light switches, door handles, or pull cords on blinds. The law says that these small repairs cannot be more than 75 to 100 euros. However, your rental contract must clearly state the limits for these small repairs. If the agreement doesn't mention this, you do not have to pay any of that. If small repairs are needed to improve how the apartment looks, the landlord should take care of them unless the rental agreement says otherwise. It's important to consider the apartment's condition when you move in. If the apartment was in poor condition and there was no agreement to fix it, the landlord must bear the repair costs. In general, your landlord must give you an apartment which is in good condition and maintained throughout your rental period. If things were out from normal use like worn floors, leaking pipes, or broken window frames, it's the landlord's job to fix them. But it's important to always look at your rental contract and see who is responsible for what. Elimination of mold. Lüften. I'm sure you have seen many memes on this topic. As a foreigner in Germany who comes from a warmer climate, lüften is something I really hate but have to do. Because if I don't do it, there is a chance that mold would form in the apartment, and it can be quite expensive to fix. But when there's mold in an apartment, it's important to figure out who is responsible for removing it. A court ruling says that if there is mold, the landlord must prove that it's not caused by things like leaking pipes in the building. If the landlord cannot prove this, they have to pay to remove the mold and fix any related problems. However, if the landlord proves the mold isn't their fault, you must show that you didn't cause it by not properly ventilating or heating the house. If you can't prove this, then you have to pay to remove the mold. Sometimes renters in Germany try to fix mold themselves by painting over it or using anti-mold spray. This is not a good idea because it doesn't solve the problem and the mold could still be there or be deeper than what's visible. People often wait too long before telling the landlord about mold. But legally, you as a renter in Germany must inform the landlord if there's mold in the apartment. In some cases, both the building and the tenant's behavior can cause mold, which is quite common. When this happens, an expert needs to check the situation to figure out who's responsible. Even if both the landlord and you, the renter, are at fault, the court says the landlord still has to remove the mold. Accountability. Your landlord must ensure that the costs for things like utility and maintenance are fair and normal. If you ask, the landlord has to show you receipts and invoices. This way you can be sure that the landlord has not overcharged you for the additional costs. And if there are repairs needed to be done, they should do them. However, the landlord does not have to use the cheapest option for everything. This can increase your Nebenkostenabrechnung. The things that I have mentioned in this video are protected by law, and you should not be afraid to assert them if necessary. What my landlady did at that time was totally illegal, and I could have taken her to court and would have easily won. So, if you have any questions or concerns about your rights as someone renting in Germany, seek legal advice. In this video, I share some of the best legal insurances in Germany. And in this video, I talk about 7 things I wish I knew when I came to Germany. So thanks for watching, bleib gesund, and I'll see you in either of these 2 videos.